The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and Claire Maddox almost threw it away without opening it. She was standing at the kitchen counter of her small rental house in Millhaven, Tennessee, still wearing her old army jacket, the one with the frayed cuffs and the faded patch on the left shoulder that nobody asked about anymore. Scout was sitting behind her, watching her the way he always did, with that quiet, unblinking attention that had once helped them both survive places most people couldn't find on a map. The envelope was plain white. No return address. Postmarked from a town called Harlan Creek, 40 miles east, up in the hills where the roads turned to gravel and the cell signal disappeared entirely. Claire's name was written in careful, old-fashioned handwriting, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who had learned to write before ballpoint pens existed. She almost set it aside with the bills. Scout whined once. Soft, low, the kind of sound he made when he wanted her to pay attention to something she was about to ignore. Claire looked at the dog, then back at the envelope. She opened it. Inside was a single folded page and a rusted iron key, old enough that the metal had begun to pit and darken along the edges. The note read 7 words in that same careful handwriting. The farm remembers what we forgot. Come. There was no signature. Claire read the words 3 times. She turned the key over in her fingers. It was heavy for its size, the kind of key that opened something built to last, a barn door, a cellar lock, something that had been waiting a long time to be opened. Scout pressed his nose against her hand. Outside the window, the Tennessee hills sat low and gray beneath an October sky the color of old pewter. Somewhere up in those hills, something was waiting. Comment 1 if you would have gone. Comment 0 if you would have stayed. And tell us where you're watching from tonight. Claire had not planned to stay in Millhaven. She had not planned much of anything since leaving Campbell 14 months ago with a discharge certificate, a service commendation she kept in a drawer she never opened, and a German shepherd named Scout who had been officially retired from active duty the same day she was. At 58, Claire Maddox looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had spent 30 years in places that asked everything of a person and gave back something harder and quieter in return. Her hair had gone silver at the temples and darker silver everywhere else. The lines around her eyes were deep, earned honestly, in desert heat and mountain cold and the particular exhaustion that came from carrying responsibility for other people's lives across decades of service. She moved carefully now. An old knee injury from Kandahar made itself known on cold mornings. Her left shoulder, reconstructed twice, ached when rain was coming. She had learned to read weather by her own body, which her late husband Daniel used to say was the most efficient meteorological system in the state of Tennessee. Daniel had died 3 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. Claire had been in Germany when it happened, finishing her final assignment. She had not made it back in time. Scout had been with her that night, in the small office on the base where she received the call. The dog had pressed against her legs and stayed there without moving for the next 4 hours while Claire sat in her chair and did not cry because she had learned long ago that crying in front of anyone, even a dog, made her feel like she was losing something she could not afford to lose. She had cried later, alone in the dark, with Scout's head on her knee. She was still learning how to be alone in ways that didn't feel like punishment. The rental house in Millhaven was her 3rd address in 14 months. She kept meaning to find somewhere permanent. She kept not quite doing it. Scout slept at the foot of her bed every night and patrolled the perimeter of the property every morning with the methodical focus of a dog who had never fully retired, not really, and probably never would. She understood that completely. The drive to Harlan Creek took 45 minutes on roads that got narrower and steeper with every mile. Claire drove her old green pickup, the one with the cracked dashboard and the Army base sticker on the rear window that she kept meaning to remove. Scout rode in the passenger seat, which he had done for 11 years now, ever since a young handler in Kabul had taught him that the front seat was acceptable when off duty, and Scout had taken this information and made it permanent policy. The hills rose around them as they left the interstate, folding into ridges dense with hickory and white oak, the leaves gone deep red and copper now in early October. The sky was low and heavy, threatening rain. The GPS lost signal twice in the last 10 miles and Claire navigated the rest from memory and instinct, the way she had learned to navigate most things. Harlan Creek was barely a town. A post office that was also a hardware store. A diner with 4 tables and a hand-lettered sign in the window that said open most days. A white clapboard church on a hill with a cemetery beside it, the headstone so old some had sunk below the grass line entirely. Claire pulled into the gravel lot beside the diner and sat for a moment with the engine running. Scout's ears came forward. The dog was reading the town the way he always read new places, systematically, patiently, missing nothing. "What do you think?" Claire asked. Scout glanced at her, then back at the main street. She took that as a professional assessment and climbed out of the truck. The diner smelled like coffee and bacon fat and something sweeter underneath, cinnamon maybe, or the particular smell of old wood that had absorbed 100 years of cooking. A woman behind the counter looked up. Late 60s, round face, white hair braided and pinned. Eyes that had seen enough not to be surprised by much. "You'd be the Maddox woman," she said. "Not a question." Claire said. "You were expecting me?" The woman set down the coffee pot she was holding. "Somebody was," she said carefully. "Whether it was me or not is a longer conversation." She looked at Scout, standing quietly at Claire's side. "That's a fine animal." "He is," Claire agreed. "You'll want to talk to Earl Sutton," the woman said. "He's the one who sent the letter." Earl Sutton lived at the end of a gravel road that climbed for 2 miles before leveling into a flat clearing where a farmhouse sat beneath 3 enormous oak trees, their branches bare and black against the gray sky. He was waiting on the porch when Claire pulled up. 80 years old at least, maybe older, the kind of age that settled into a man's bones and made him look permanent, like something carved from the landscape itself. He wore overalls and a canvas jacket and held a walking stick he didn't appear to need. Scout stepped out of the truck and stood still, reading the old man. Earl Sutton looked at the dog for a long time. Something moved across his face that Claire could not immediately name. "She had a dog," he said, without introduction or preamble. "Your grandmother. Same breed. Different dog, but the same way of standing. They're listening to things the rest of US can't hear." Claire stopped walking. "You knew my grandmother?" "Dorothy Maddox." Earl nodded slowly. "Knew her 40 years. She died without telling anyone what she should have told. I've been waiting for someone from your family to come back ever since." He looked at Claire with eyes that were faded blue and very sharp. "Didn't expect it to take this long." "I didn't know there was anything to come back to," Claire said. "No," Earl said. "That was the problem." He turned and opened the screen door. "Come inside. I'll tell you what I know. Then you'll need to go out to the Harlan farm and find what I don't." Scout followed Claire up the porch steps without being asked. Earl watched the dog again with that unreadable expression. "She called her Sergeant," he said quietly. "Your grandmother." "The dog." "She called him Sergeant." He held the door open. "Come in before the rain starts." The inside of Earl Sutton's house smelled like wood smoke and old paper and something medicinal, eucalyptus maybe, or camphor. Every surface held something. Books stacked sideways on shelves already full of books. Photographs in frames crowding every wall. A kitchen table buried under maps and folders and what appeared to be 40 years of handwritten notes. Earl moved through the clutter without disturbing any of it, the practiced navigation of a man who knew exactly where everything was even when it looked like chaos. He set a kettle on the stove and pulled 2 chairs to the table, moving a stack of folders to do it. Scout settled on the floor near the door, his eyes moving slowly around the room, cataloging. "Dorothy Maddox was your father's mother," Earl said, sitting heavily. "She came to Harlan Creek in 1962, after your grandfather died. She had 3 children, very little money, and a piece of land that had been in the Maddox family since before the Civil War. The Harlan farm," Claire said. 48 acres. Old farmhouse, 2 barns, a creek running through the south field." Earl folded his hands on the table. "Good land. Valuable land, even then. More valuable now because of what's underneath it." Claire felt something shift in her chest. "What's underneath it?" Earl looked at her steadily. "Natural gas deposits. Significant ones. A survey done in 1987 confirmed it. The mineral rights alone are worth considerable money, assuming the documents proving ownership can be found and verified." "And they can't be found," Claire said. "Dorothy hid them," Earl said. "I believe she hid them on the farm itself. She didn't trust banks. She didn't trust lawyers. She trusted the land." He paused. "She died in 2003. The farm has been empty since. The county listed it as abandoned property. In 6 months, if nowhere comes forward with documentation, it goes to a land development company that has been circling it for 2 years." Scout lifted his head from the floor. His ears came forward. Outside, the rain began. The Harlan farm was 3 miles from Earl Sutton's house, down a road so overgrown the truck's mirrors branches on both sides. Claire saw it first through a gap in the tree line. The farmhouse sat on a small rise, 2 stories, white paint gone gray and peeling, the front porch sagging on the left side where a support post had given way. Behind it, 2 barns, one collapsed entirely, the other still standing but leaning with a resigned quality, as if it had been leaning long enough to forget what upright felt like. She parked at the edge of the overgrown driveway and sat for a moment. Scout was already alert. His posture had changed the moment they turned onto the farm road, something tightening through his shoulders, his head coming up, his nose working steadily. Not threat detection. Something else. Recognition, maybe, or the animal awareness of a place that held old things. Claire climbed out and stood in the rain, which was light now, barely more than mist, and looked at the house her grandmother had lived in. She had never been here before. Her father had never spoken of Tennessee. Had never mentioned a farm or a grandmother named Dorothy or 48 acres of land. He had left at 18, moved north, built a different life, and carried the silence of wherever he came from like something too heavy to put down and too painful to examine. Claire understood that kind of silence. She had her own version of it. She walked toward the house. Scout moved ahead of her, not rushing, but deliberate, his paws finding the wet grass without sound. He reached the porch steps first and stopped, his nose dropping to the wood, reading something in the grain and the damp. Then he looked back at Claire. That look. She knew that look. 11 years of working together had given her a complete dictionary of Scout's expressions, and that particular one, steady and intent and waiting, meant, "I have something to show you." "Pay attention," Claire said softly. "Show me." The front door was unlocked. Not forced, not broken. Simply unlocked, the old brass knob turning easily when Claire tried it, as if someone had left it that way on purpose, or as if the house itself had decided to let her in. The smell hit her first. Damp wood and decades of accumulated dust, and beneath that, faintly, something floral. Lavender, dried and ancient but still present, the ghost of a scent that had once belonged to someone who kept dried flowers in bowls on windowsills. Her grandmother's smell, though Claire had never known it until this moment. Scout moved through the entry hall with focused, systematic attention, his nose working the baseboards, the floor, the air itself. He moved like the professional he was, clearing a space the way they had cleared hundreds of structures overseas, methodically, missing nothing, his body language calm but completely engaged. Claire followed, taking in the rooms. The parlor held 2 chairs with rotted upholstery and a fireplace with a stone mantel carved with a pattern of oak leaves. The kitchen still had its cast iron stove, solid and black, and a wooden table with 4 chairs, one tipped on its side where someone had left it and no one had come back to set right. On the kitchen wall, a photograph in a cracked frame. Claire lifted it carefully. A woman standing in front of this house, this exact porch, in what appeared to be the early 1970s. Dark hair going silver. Strong hands. Eyes that looked directly at the camera with an expression that was not quite a smile but held something warmer than severity. Claire had seen that expression before. In mirrors. She set the photograph back and followed Scout, who had moved to the base of the staircase and was standing with his nose pointed upward. "Upstairs," Claire said. Scout looked at her. "Lead on," she said. He went up the stairs without hesitation, each step placed with careful precision, and Claire followed her dog into the upper floor of a house she had never known existed, looking for something her grandmother had hidden 40 years ago and trusted the land to keep. The upstairs held 3 bedrooms and a narrow bathroom with a clawfoot tub gone rust-stained at the drain. Scout passed the first 2 bedrooms without stopping. At the third, the smallest, at the end of the hall, he stopped completely. His ears came forward. His tail dropped to the horizontal, the position Claire had learned to read as, "This is the place. Right here." The room held a single iron bed frame, a wardrobe with a cracked mirror on its door, and a wooden chest beneath the window. The chest was old, the wood dark with age, bound with iron straps that had oxidized to the color of dried blood. Scout walked to the chest and sat beside it. He did not paw at it. Did not bark. Simply sat, with the composed certainty of a dog who had found what he was looking for and was now waiting for the slower human to catch up. Claire crouched beside the chest. The iron key from the envelope was in her jacket pocket. She had known, from the moment she read the letter, that this was what it opened. She just hadn't known where the lock was. Now she did. The key fit perfectly. The lock was stiff with decades of disuse, and Claire worked it carefully, not forcing it, the way she had learned to work old mechanisms overseas, patience over pressure. It gave with a sound like an exhaled breath, a soft, deep click that seemed too significant for a simple piece of hardware. She opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them remarkably well, was a bundle of documents. Land deeds, survey records, a handwritten letter in the same careful script as the note in the envelope. A smaller envelope sealed with wax. And beneath all of it, a photograph of a woman and a German shepherd, standing in a field at the edge of a tree line, the dog pressed against the woman's leg, both of them looking at something beyond the camera's frame. The woman was Dorothy Maddox. The dog was enormous, with a broad chest and calm, intelligent eyes that seemed to look out from the photograph with a focused, patient intensity that felt, in this moment, very familiar. Claire looked at Scout. Scout looked at the photograph. Something passed between them that Claire could not have explained in words, but understood completely. "She left it for us," Claire said quietly. "She just didn't know which one of us would come." She was still crouched over the chest when she heard the truck. Scout heard it first, naturally. His head came up, ears pivoting, body going very still. Then Claire heard it too, the crunch of tires on the gravel drive, moving slowly, the way vehicles moved when they were trying not to be heard. She closed the chest lid quietly. She did not lock it. She put the key in her pocket and stood and moved to the window, staying to the side of the frame the way she had been trained to do in places where standing in front of windows was a way of advertising your position to people who wished you harm. A dark gray pickup had stopped at the edge of the driveway. A man sat behind the wheel, not getting out, just looking at Claire's truck parked there, at the open front door of the house. Late 40s, heavy through the shoulders. A face she couldn't read at this distance. Scout moved silently to stand beside her, his body pressed lightly against her leg. "Watching. You know him?" Claire murmured. Scout's ears stayed forward. Not the flat, threat-focused ears of imminent danger. Something more measured. This person was unknown, not yet classified. The man in the gray truck picked up his phone, looked at it, put it down. He sat for another 30 seconds. Then he reversed out of the driveway and drove back the way he'd come. The road went quiet again. The rain had stopped. Water dripped from the oak branches outside the window with a sound like a slow clock. Claire let out a breath she hadn't fully realized she was holding. "Earl Sutton said someone had been circling this property," she said to Scout. "I think we just met one of the circles." Scout's gaze remained on the empty driveway for another full minute before he turned away, satisfied or simply noting the information for later. Claire picked up the sealed wax envelope from the chest. Her grandmother's handwriting on the front. "For whoever comes. Open this last." She put it in her inside jacket pocket, next to her heart, and went downstairs to make sure the front door locked behind them. Earl Sutton's expression, when Claire laid the documents on his kitchen table, was the expression of a man watching something arrive that he had waited a very long time to see. He touched the edge of the land deed with one finger, not picking it up, just touching it, the way you touched something you weren't entirely sure was real. "Dorothy was right," he said quietly. "She said the land would keep them. 40 years, and the land kept them." Claire sat across from him. Scout had settled near the wood stove, the warmth pulling at him after the damp cold of the farmhouse, and he stretched out with the particular contentment of a working dog who had completed a task and been given permission to rest. "Tell me about the man in the gray truck," Claire said. Earl looked up. "Before you answer," Claire said, "understand that I spent 30 years in situations where people not telling me things got other people killed. So please just tell me." Earl was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "His name is Boyd Harlan," he said. "The family owned the land before the Maddoxes. There was a sale, 1959, legally documented. Your grandfather bought the land outright. But Boyd has spent the last 15 years claiming the sale was fraudulent. That the Harlans were cheated. Were they?" "No," Earl said, with the flatness of someone who had examined this question thoroughly and reached a definite conclusion. "I've read every document from that period. The sale was clean. Boyd just doesn't like that the land went out of his family, and he found a lawyer willing to argue a case that isn't there." He paused. "But if those documents you found authenticate and you register your claim before the county deadline, his case disappears entirely. How long do I have?" 11 days, Earl said. Scout raised his head from near the stove and looked at Claire with an expression she knew very well. 11 days is enough. Let's get to work." The next morning Claire woke before dawn. She lay still for a moment, listening to the house around her. The rental in Millhaven creaked in the night wind the way old houses did, settling and shifting, speaking in a language of wood and nail and time. Scout was already awake. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, the particular alertness that meant he had been watching the dark for some time and found it acceptable. She had spread the documents across the kitchen table the night before and spent 3 hours reading them by lamplight. The land deed was dated 1959, her grandfather James Maddox's name written in ink that had faded to the color of weak tea. The mineral rights survey from 1987 was more technical, dense with geological language she had to read twice, but the conclusion was clear. The survey had identified a natural gas deposit beneath the south field of the Harlan farm of sufficient size to be commercially significant. Dorothy Maddox had known what she had. And she had known someone would try to take it. The sealed wax envelope sat on the table beside the deed. Claire had not opened it yet. Her grandmother had written open this last, and Claire had spent 30 years learning to follow instructions in the order they were given. She got up, made coffee, and stood at the window while Scout went out to run his morning perimeter in the gray pre-dawn. The Tennessee hills were dark shapes against a slightly lighter sky, patient and enormous and indifferent to the problems of people. Daniel would have liked it here, she thought. He had always wanted land. Something to put his hands on, something that stayed where you left it. She had always been the one moving, the one with orders and assignments and the next deployment already forming on the horizon. He had stayed and waited and loved her across the distance with a steadiness she had never fully deserved and never stopped being grateful for. Scout scratched at the back door. She let him in, poured his breakfast, and sat down at the table with the sealed envelope. Her grandmother's handwriting, for whoever comes. Open this last. Claire opened it. The letter inside was 4 pages, written in the same careful script, dated March 2003, 2 months before Dorothy Maddox died. Claire read it slowly, the way she had learned to read intelligence reports, taking in each sentence completely before moving to the next, not rushing toward the conclusion at the expense of the details. If you are reading this, her grandmother had written, then someone in my family finally came home. I hoped it would be my son. I always hoped it would be Thomas. But Thomas left and didn't come back, not really, not in the ways that matter, and I have made my peace with that. People leave places for reasons that belong to them, and the reasons are almost never simple. I am writing this because I am old now and my heart is unreliable, and I know what unreliable hearts do eventually. The land is yours. It has always been yours. James bought it clean in 1959 from old Carl Harlan, who needed the money and agreed to the price and signed the papers in front of witnesses whose names are on the deed. What Carl Harlan told his children about that transaction is between him and God. The mineral survey is in the chest with this letter. A geologist named Whitmore conducted it in 1987. He told me what was under the south field, and I thanked him and paid him and asked him not to speak of it. I don't know if he kept that confidence. I know that shortly after the survey, Boyd Harlan began making noise about the original sale being fraudulent. Boyd Harlan is not an honest man. His father wasn't either. The land made them feel entitled in the way land sometimes makes people feel, like ownership is a virtue rather than a circumstance. I hid everything because I didn't trust what would happen if the wrong people knew what was here. I was an old woman alone, and I had learned that old women alone were not always listened to, even when they were right. But I left the key with Earl Sutton because Earl is the most honest person I have ever known, and I trusted him to find the right moment. Whoever you are, the letter ended, whatever brought you back here, the land is yours. Fight for it. And if you have a dog, listen to the dog. I always found that dogs knew things before people did. With love across whatever distance. Dorothy. Claire set the letter down. Scout, who had finished his breakfast and come to sit beside her chair, pressed his head against her arm. She put her hand on his neck and sat with her grandmother's words in the morning quiet of a house that was not yet home, and let herself feel, for just a moment, all the things she usually kept carefully set aside. She called the county clerk's office when it opened at 9. The woman who answered was polite and efficient and told Claire that yes, a claim could be filed on the Harlan farm property provided sufficient documentation of lineage and ownership could be presented, and yes, the deadline was 11 days from today, and yes, there was an existing challenge on record filed by a Boyd Harlan of Harlan Creek, Tennessee, represented by an attorney named Curtis Vane of the Vane Law Group in Nashville. Claire wrote down the name Curtis Vane and thanked the woman and hung up. She looked at Scout. Nashville attorney, she said. That's not a small operation for a property dispute in a county with 400 people. Scout's ears moved. Someone is paying that attorney, Claire said. And it isn't Boyd Harlan, who from what Earl described lives in a house with a broken porch and drives a truck that's older than my army career. She called Earl Sutton next. He answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake for hours, which did not surprise her. Curtis Vane, she said. A pause. You found the letter. I did. Another pause, longer. Curtis Vane represents several development interests in this part of Tennessee. A company called Meridian Land Holdings has been acquiring mineral rights across 4 counties for the past 3 years. Quietly. Through intermediaries. Earl's voice was careful and precise, the voice of a man who had been thinking about this for a long time. Boyd Harlan filed his challenge 18 months ago. Within a week, Meridian Land Holdings had retained Curtis Vane on his behalf. Claire felt the shape of it settling into focus. The way a situation clarified when you finally had enough information to see the actual structure underneath the surface detail. They're using Boyd's grudge, she said, as a legal tool. If his challenge succeeds and the property goes to him, he sells to Meridian. If the county takes it as abandoned, Meridian buys it at auction. Either way, Earl said quietly, they get the mineral rights. Either way, Claire agreed. Scout stood up from the floor and stretched, front legs extending, the slow methodical stretch of a dog preparing to work. I need a lawyer, Claire said. I know one, Earl said. She's 72 years old and she hasn't lost a property case in this county in 30 years. Good, Claire said. Set it up. Margaret Oakes had an office above the hardware store on Harlan Creek's Main Street, reached by an exterior staircase with a railing that had been repaired so many times it looked like a patchwork of different decades of ironwork. She was small, precise, with white hair cut short and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck and eyes behind those glasses that were the sharpest Claire had encountered outside of a military briefing room. Scout entered the office ahead of Claire, performed his assessment of the space in approximately 15 seconds, and then sat down near the window with the air of a professional who had determined the situation was acceptable. Margaret Oakes watched this performance with evident appreciation. German Shepherd, she said. Former military working dog, Claire said. I can tell. Margaret looked at Claire. Earl tells me you have the original deed, the mineral survey, and a signed letter from the deceased owner establishing intent. I do. And you're the granddaughter of Dorothy Maddox, which makes you a direct heir. Her son Thomas was my father. He died 8 years ago. Margaret nodded slowly, making notes on a yellow legal pad with a pen that appeared to be as old as she was. Boyd Harlan's challenge is based on a claim that the 1959 sale involved misrepresentation of the property's value, specifically that James Maddox concealed knowledge of the mineral deposits at the time of sale. She looked up. The mineral survey was conducted in 1987. The sale was in 1959. Unless someone has invented time travel, that argument has no basis. Then why has it been allowed to proceed for 18 months? Margaret's expression said a great many things without saying any of them out loud. Because Curtis Vane is very good at procedural delay, and because the county legal system operates on limited resources, and because until now there was no one on the other side with documentation to counter the claim. She set down her pen. If you file a formal ownership claim with the documentation you have, I can counter Vane's challenge within the deadline. But I want to be direct with you, Claire. Meridian Land Holdings is not a small company. They will not accept this quietly. I don't need them to accept it quietly, Claire said. I just need the law to work the way it's supposed to. Margaret Oakes looked at her for a long moment. I like you, she said simply. All right. Let's get to work. Boyd Harlan came to the farm on the 4th day. Claire saw him from the upper window, the same gray truck she had seen on the first day, pulling slowly into the overgrown driveway. She had been working in the farmhouse, beginning the assessment of what needed to be done structurally, making notes she told herself were preliminary and not yet an admission that she was planning to stay. Scout had heard the truck a full minute before it appeared. He stood now at the top of the stairs, ears forward, body very still, monitoring. Claire went downstairs and opened the front door before Boyd Harlan reached the porch. He was bigger up close than he had appeared through the window. Late 40s, broad across the chest, with the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors and the defensive posture of someone who had spent a lot of time being told things he didn't want to hear. His eyes moved to Scout and then away, quickly, the way people moved their eyes when they wanted to pretend they hadn't noticed something that had concerned them. Ms. Maddox, he said. Mr. Harlan, Claire said. I wanted to talk to you directly. He held his hands slightly away from his sides, not a threatening gesture, more the gesture of a man trying to communicate that he wasn't threatening, which Claire noted was different from actually not being threatening. Before the lawyers make everything complicated. The lawyers are already involved, Claire said. I know that. He stopped. Tried again. This land belonged to my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built that barn. He pointed toward the collapsed structure behind the house. The one that fell down, I know, but he built it. I understand that, Claire said. Do you? Something in his voice that was almost genuine. It's not just money. It's the fact that it went wrong somewhere and nobody fixed it. Scout moved to stand just behind Claire's left shoulder. Not aggressive. Present. Boyd Harlan looked at the dog again. I don't want trouble, he said. Neither do I, Claire said. But I have documentation establishing clear legal ownership and I'm going to file it. If you have documentation that contradicts it, you're welcome to present it through the proper legal process. That's what the proper legal process is for. A silence. The people backing you, Claire said. Meridian Land Holdings. They don't care about your grandfather's barn. Something shifted in Boyd Harlan's face. Just for a moment. Something that might have been the beginning of an understanding he wasn't ready to complete. He nodded once, got back in his truck, and drove away. Scout watched until the sound of the engine faded entirely. That night, someone tried to break into Earl Sutton's house. Earl called Claire at 2 a.m, his voice entirely calm in the way that very old people who have survived many things are sometimes. The calmness of someone who has already decided that fear is not an efficient use of time. They didn't get in, he said. I heard them at the back door and turned on all the lights and they left. But I thought you should know. Are you all right? I'm 81 years old and I sleep with a shotgun under my bed that has been there since 1987 and has never been needed and probably won't be, Earl said. I'm fine. Though. The documents are with me, Claire said. She had moved them from Earl's house to her truck to her rental, photographed and copied, and the originals stored in the fireproof lockbox that had been in her truck since Kandahar and that she had never yet had occasion to use in civilian life. They're secure. Good, Earl said. Then I'll go back to sleep. Earl. Claire hesitated. I'm sorry this came to your door. A pause. Dorothy Maddox was the best friend I had for 40 years, Earl said quietly. Making sure her family got what she left them is not a burden. It's a privilege. Another pause. Good night, Claire. She stood in her dark kitchen for a long time after the call ended, Scout pressed against her leg, both of them listening to the Tennessee night. Then she went to the lockbox, checked the documents one more time, and called Margaret Oakes's emergency number, which the attorney had given her with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that property disputes did not restrict themselves to business hours. It's escalating, Claire said when Margaret answered. I expected it might, Margaret said. I'll file the claim first thing tomorrow morning rather than waiting. Can you be at my office at 7? I can, Claire said. Bring the dog, Margaret said. He has better judgment than most people I work with. The filing went through at 9:17 in the morning. Margaret called Claire from the county clerk's office while Claire sat in the truck in the parking lot of the hardware store with Scout in the passenger seat and a cup of coffee going cold in the cup holder. It's done, Margaret said. Ownership claim filed, supporting documentation submitted, copy delivered to the county recorder. Boyd Harlan's attorney has been formally notified. Claire let out a breath. How will Vane respond? He'll file for an emergency injunction to delay the claim processing. He has the procedural grounds to do it, technically, but Judge Patricia Hollis handles property matters in this county and she has the patience for exactly this type of maneuver. A brief pause, which is to say, very little of it. When will we know? Hollis will rule on the injunction within 48 hours. If she denies it, which I expect she will, the claim proceeds and Vane's challenge has to be resolved on its merits. Margaret's voice carried the particular satisfaction of someone who was very good at their work and knew it. On its merits, his challenge has no ground to stand on. And Meridian? Meridian will do what large companies do when a legal strategy fails. They'll try another one. A pause. I want you to be careful, Claire. Not about the law. The law is working in your favor. In other ways. I understand, Claire said. I know you do, Margaret said. I'll be in touch. Claire put the phone down and looked at Scout. The German Shepherd was watching two sparrows argue over a piece of bread in the parking lot with the focused attention of a former working dog who had learned to find the patrol quality in ordinary things. 48 hours, Claire told him. Scout flicked an ear toward her without taking his eyes off the sparrows. She started the truck and drove back toward the farm, because there was work to be done there regardless of how the law moved, and because the farm, she had decided somewhere in the last 4 days without entirely meaning to, was where she needed to be. She found the second hiding place on the 5th day, and it was Scout who found it. She had been working in the south barn, the one still standing, assessing the structural damage, when Scout left her side without warning and moved to the far corner of the barn's interior, where old hay bales had compressed over decades into something more like solid matter than vegetation. He stood at the base of the wall and nosed at the gap between the lowest bale and the stone foundation. Claire came to look. The gap was wider than it appeared at first glance, and deep. She got down on her knees and shone her flashlight into it and saw, pushed back against the foundation stone, a tin box, the kind that had once held tobacco or cookies, rusted now but intact, sealed with tape that had dried and cracked but still held. She worked it out carefully. Inside, wrapped in a cloth that had been oiled against moisture, was a small notebook, the pages dense with her grandmother's handwriting. Claire sat on the barn floor in the cold October light and read it while Scout lay beside her, his warm weight against her hip, his breathing the steady backdrop of something completely reliable. The notebook was a record. 40 years of it. Every approach made to Dorothy Maddox regarding the land, with dates and names and what was said. Every threat, recorded without drama. Every offer, with the figures and who made them. Every time she had refused, which was every time, written simply as refused and the date. The final entry was from January 2003. A man named Hargrove came again today on behalf of a company he wouldn't name. He offered 3 times what the land could reasonably be worth at surface value. He didn't mention the mineral survey. He thought I didn't know about it. I did not correct this assumption. I told him the land was not for sale. He said I would regret it. I am 79 years old. I have learned that people who say you will regret things are usually describing their own future, not yours. I have put the notebook here because the chest will be the obvious place to look if someone looks. This is less obvious. If you found the chest first, come to the barn. If you found the barn first, go find the chest. Everything together tells the whole story. Don't let them have either piece. Claire looked at her grandmother's last written words for a long time. Then she looked at Scout. Good dog, she said. It was the highest compliment she knew how to give. The injunction was denied on the morning of the 7th day. Margaret called with the news at 8:15, her voice carrying the specific restrained satisfaction of a woman who had been right about something important and was too professional to say I told you so but was clearly thinking it. Judge Hollis ruled in 41 hours, Margaret said. She noted in her written ruling that the injunction appeared to be a procedural delay tactic without substantive legal basis. She used the phrase without substantive legal basis twice. Once was sufficient. Twice was a message. What happens now? Vane has filed a notice of intent to continue the underlying challenge. He has 30 days to build his case. But with the documentation you have, including the notebook, which I want to discuss in detail, his case has no foundation. Margaret paused. I also want to tell you something. I made some inquiries about Meridian Land Holdings. Their principal investor is a company called Garrison Capital, based in Nashville. Garrison Capital has a pending application before the State Energy Commission for a natural gas extraction license in this county. Another pause. The application lists the Harlan Farm mineral rights as a component of the proposed extraction territory. Claire absorbed this. They applied for the license before they had the rights, she said. Before they had secured the rights, Margaret said carefully. They appear to have been confident they would. That confidence was based on the assumption that no heir would appear with documentation. That would be my reading, yes. Scout had come to sit beside Claire's chair while she was on the phone, resting his chin on her knee. She put her hand on his head without thinking about it. Is the premature license application useful to us? Claire asked. It suggests, Margaret said, that Meridian's involvement in the Harlan Challenge is not coincidental and not merely supportive. It suggests coordination, which, depending on what it can be proven they knew and when, may be relevant to more than just your property claim. How much more? A pause. Potentially considerably more, Margaret said. I have a colleague in Nashville who handles energy law. I'd like to make a call. Make it, Claire said. On the 8th night, Scout woke her at 3 in the morning. He didn't bark. He simply stood beside the bed and put his nose against her hand, the way he had done hundreds of times over 11 years, and she came awake immediately and completely, the way she had trained herself to come awake in places where the difference between sleeping and waking could matter a great deal. She listened. For a moment there was nothing. Then she heard it. A sound from outside, from the direction of the back of the property. Not loud. Not dramatic. The sound of someone moving who was trying not to be heard, which was, paradoxically, always more audible than regular movement. She dressed quickly, put on her boots, and took the flashlight from the nightstand. Scout was at the back door before her. She opened it quietly and they went out into the dark Tennessee night together, the way they had gone into the dark together so many times before, in places where the dark held much more dangerous things than whoever was currently moving through her backyard. The figure was at her truck, trying the door handle, finding it locked, moving around to the truck bed, lifting the cover on the storage compartment. "I'd stop there," Claire said. Her voice was the voice she had used in Kandahar and Mosul and a dozen other places, the voice that communicated without any possibility of misunderstanding that the person speaking was completely serious and had no interest in negotiation. The figure froze. Scout moved forward into the spill of the flashlight beam, and the figure, a young man, 25 at most, with the look of someone who had been paid to do something and had not been paid enough, saw the German shepherd and made a sound that was not quite a word. "The documents aren't in the truck," Claire said. "They haven't been in the truck since day 2. Whatever you were sent to find, it isn't here." The young man looked at Scout. Scout looked at the young man with the patient, focused attention of a dog who had located his objective and was waiting for instructions. "Go home," Claire said. "Tell whoever sent you that this approach isn't going to work. The claim has been filed. The injunction was denied. The law is in process. There is nothing in this truck or in that house that changes any of that." A long silence. The young man went. Claire stood in the dark with Scout beside her and watched him go, and then she went back inside and made coffee because sleep was not going to return tonight, and sat at the kitchen table with her grandmother's notebook and read it again from the beginning, looking for anything she had missed. The call from Nashville came on the 9th day. Margaret's colleague, an energy law attorney named James Whitfield, had been thorough. He called Claire directly, with Margaret on the line, and spoke for 20 minutes in the precise, unhurried manner of someone who had spent a career translating complex legal structures into language that decision-makers could act on. Meridian Land Holdings had filed its State Energy Commission application 14 months ago. The application referenced mineral rights to 4 properties in Harlan County, including the Harlan Farm, as secured or in process of being secured. The Harlan Farm mineral rights had been listed as in process, meaning they expected Boyd Harlan's challenge to succeed, Claire said. "That would be the logical inference," Whitfield said carefully. "The application also lists a projected extraction start date of 18 months from the filing date, which is 4 months from now. They're on a timeline," Claire said. "A significant one. There are investors behind Meridian who have been told extraction begins in 4 months. If it doesn't, those investors have contractual grounds to withdraw. The entire project structure depends on acquiring these mineral rights within the next 60 days. Claire looked at Scout, who was lying on the kitchen floor in a patch of thin October sunlight, watching her. "So denying them the rights doesn't just stop this project," she said. "It collapses it." "Entirely," Whitfield said. "And given that their state application listed rights they did not yet legally possess as secured, there may be grounds for a commission complaint regarding misrepresentation in a licensing application, which is a separate problem for them entirely," Margaret said. "A significant one," Whitfield confirmed. "I'd like to file that complaint on your behalf, Claire, with your permission. It won't affect your property claim. It runs parallel, but it puts Meridian in a defensive position on 2 fronts simultaneously." Claire was quiet for a moment. Daniel had always said she had a gift for seeing the whole board. She had always told him it wasn't a gift, it was training. He had always said that was the same thing. "File it," she said. Boyd Harlan came back on the 10th day. This time he came alone and on foot, walking up the farm road in the gray morning with his hands in his jacket pockets and his head down, the walk of a man going somewhere he had decided to go before he could change his mind. Claire was on the porch when he arrived. She had been drinking coffee and watching Scout run the field line, the old dog moving through the tall grass with a focused pleasure that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with the simple fact of being a dog in a field on a cold morning. Boyd Harlan stopped at the foot of the porch steps. Scout came in from the field at a steady trot and positioned himself at Claire's side without being called. He looked at Boyd Harlan with the even, unalarmed attention of a dog who had assessed this person before and reached a conclusion that was not threat but was not yet trust. "I fired Curtis Vane this morning," Boyd Harlan said. Claire waited. "I called Meridian's office in Nashville yesterday," he said. "I asked them directly what their plans were for the property if my challenge succeeded and I recovered title." He stopped, looked at the ground for a moment. "They were very polite. They explained that they would need to purchase the mineral rights as a condition of any development agreement. The price they named was about a quarter of what those rights are actually worth." He looked up. "They were going to use me to get the land and then buy it from me cheap. They needed my name on the challenge because my family history made it plausible. Without me, they had no mechanism. I know, Claire said. He nodded slowly. I figured you did. He looked at the farmhouse behind her. My grandfather's barn is the one that collapsed, he said. Not because your grandmother neglected it. It was already going when she bought the place. Carl Harlan wasn't much of a carpenter. Something that might have been a rueful acknowledgement moved across his face. My grandfather told the story different. Families do that. They do, Claire said. A silence between them that was less hostile than any silence they had shared before. I'm dropping the challenge, he said. Vane will file the withdrawal today. He looked at Scout, then back at Claire. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for the trouble. Claire considered him. There's a stone wall along the east field line, she said. It needs relaying. I don't know this land yet and I don't know the stonework traditions here. I could use someone who does. Boyd Harlan looked at her for a long moment. I know the east field, he said quietly. I played there as a boy. Come back when the legal business is finished, Claire said. We'll talk about the wall. The withdrawal of Boyd Harlan's challenge arrived at the county clerk's office at 2 p.m. on the 10th day. Margaret called Claire within minutes, and for the first time since Claire had climbed those exterior stairs to the office above the hardware store, Margaret Oakes allowed herself to sound pleased. The challenge is withdrawn. The ownership claim proceeds unopposed. Barring any extraordinary procedural development in the next 24 hours, the Harlan farm and its mineral rights will be legally registered in your name by end of business tomorrow. Claire was standing in the farmhouse kitchen when the call came, the same kitchen where Dorothy Maddox had stood for 40 years, where the cast iron stove still held the accumulated warmth of every meal ever cooked on it in a way that old iron did, like a kind of memory that lived in metal. Thank you, Margaret, she said. For all of it. Don't thank me, Margaret said, with the brisk efficiency of someone deflecting sentiment. You did the hard part. You showed up. A pause, and then, more quietly, Dorothy would be glad. Claire stood for a moment after the call ended, in the kitchen of a house she was beginning to think of as hers, in a county she had not known existed 6 months ago, on land that had been waiting for her with the patient indifference of land, which did not care who came or when but simply continued being itself until someone arrived who understood what it was. Scout came in from the hall and sat in the kitchen doorway, watching her. It's done, she told him. His tail moved once, slow and certain. Outside, the October light was doing something extraordinary to the hillside to the west, the late afternoon sun breaking through cloud cover and hitting the colored leaves at an angle that made the whole ridge glow, amber and copper and gold, the way Tennessee looked in autumn when it was trying to remind you why people had wanted this land badly enough to fight for it across 3 centuries. Claire stood at the kitchen window and watched the light on the hills for a long time. The Meridian complaint before the State Energy Commission was filed the same afternoon. James Whitfield sent Claire a copy by email, 12 pages of precise legal language documenting Meridian Land Holdings' misrepresentation of unacquired mineral rights as secured in a state licensing application. The complaint cited 3 specific instances where the application language implied ownership that did not legally exist. Claire read it at the kitchen table that evening, the farmhouse around her settling into its nighttime sounds, the creak of old wood in the cooling air, the distant sound of the creek in the south field, the particular silence of a place that had been empty for 20 years and was slowly, reluctantly, beginning to remember what it felt like to have someone in it. She had brought a few things from the rental in Millhaven. Not much. A bag of clothes, her books, her coffee equipment, the lockbox, Scout's bed, which he had not used since the first night because he had immediately claimed the old braided rug in the bedroom as superior and she had not argued. She was not, she told herself, moving in. She was staying until the legal process concluded. She was being practical. Scout came and put his chin on the edge of the table and looked at her with the expression that meant he was either hungry or amused, and with Scout it was sometimes genuinely difficult to tell which. I know, she said. He lifted his head. I'm moving in, she said. Obviously. I know. His tail moved. She looked around the kitchen. At the cast iron stove that would need servicing but could be restored. At the window over the sink that looked out onto the oak trees. At the table where her grandmother had sat for 40 years, writing notes in a notebook, keeping records, protecting what she had built. Daniel would have loved this kitchen. The thought arrived quietly, without the usual weight of grief behind it. Just a clean, simple fact. He would have stood at that window and looked at those oaks and he would have said something that made her laugh, because he had always been able to make her laugh in the moments when she most needed it. She allowed herself to feel that for a moment, the clean fact of it, the love without the loss, just for a moment. Then she closed the laptop and went to make dinner in her grandmother's kitchen. The legal registration came through on the 11th day, with 6 hours to spare before the county deadline. Margaret drove to the farm to deliver the news in person, which told Claire something about what this case had meant to her. She arrived at 10 in the morning in a practical gray sedan, climbed out with a folder under her arm and the particular posture of a woman who had won many important things and had never once made a performance of it, and handed the folder to Claire on the porch steps. Inside was a copy of the registered ownership document. Claire Maddox, heir to Dorothy Maddox, legal owner of the Harlan Farm, 48 acres, Harlan County, Tennessee, including all surface and mineral rights as surveyed and documented. Claire held the document and looked at it for a moment. Margaret sat on the porch step and accepted the coffee Claire offered without comment. Scout came to sit beside the attorney with the easy familiarity of a dog who had decided this person was acceptable, which was as strong an endorsement as he gave. "What happens with Meridian?" Claire asked. "The commission complaint will take months to resolve," Margaret said. "These things always do. But their license application is now frozen pending the investigation. The investors Whitfield mentioned have already begun asking questions, according to sources I am not going to name. The project is in serious trouble." She sipped her coffee. Whether it ultimately constitutes criminal misrepresentation or merely aggressive optimism in a licensing document is a question for the commission's investigators. "That's not your fight." "My fight is done," Claire said. "Your fight is done," Margaret agreed. They sat on the porch together in the October morning, the attorney and the veteran, and drank their coffee and looked out at the land, at the bare oaks and the copper hillsides and the south field where the creek ran and the ground underneath held what it held, patient and unchanged. Scout lay between them, his eyes half closed in the thin sunlight, his breathing slow and even. An old dog at rest after good work. She called her daughter that evening. Nora was 31, lived in Portland, worked in environmental consulting. They spoke every 2 or 3 weeks, conversations that were warm enough and honest enough but carried the particular distance of a mother and daughter who loved each other and had never quite found the same language for it. Claire had been away too much. Nora had grown up with a mother who was often somewhere else, and she had grown up capable and independent and with a self-sufficiency that Claire was proud of and sometimes, in the honest dark, blamed herself for making necessary. "Mom," Nora said, and the warmth in the single word was so uncomplicated that Claire had to pause for a moment before she could speak. "I need to tell you something," Claire said. "About our family. About your great-grandmother." She told Nora everything. The letter, the farm, the documents, the notebook, the legal fight. She told it in order, the way she told everything, and she did not leave out the parts about what it had felt like to stand in her grandmother's kitchen for the first time or to read her grandmother's words and find them so familiar. Nora was quiet for a long time when Claire finished. "You found us land," Nora said finally. "I found us family," Claire said. "The land came with it." Another silence. "Is it beautiful?" Nora asked. Claire looked out the farmhouse window at the evening sky above the Tennessee hills, the last light going amber in deep rows along the ridge line, the oaks black against it, the creek somewhere in the south field catching what was left of the light. "Yes," she said. "It's very beautiful. Can I come see it?" "Whenever you want," Claire said. "There's a lot of work to do on the house. I could use someone with good judgment about structural priorities." Nora laughed. The sound of it was so like Daniel that Claire's chest tightened for just a moment. "That's the least sentimental invitation I've ever received to visit my family's ancestral home." "It's a working farm," Claire said. "Sentiment comes after the porch is fixed." Scout, lying at her feet, thumped his tail once on the floorboards. "I'll come next month," Nora said. "Save me some of the good work." November came to the Harlan farm slowly and then all at once. The leaves went from copper to brown to gone in the space of 2 weeks, and the hills that had been blazing became gray skeletal, the ridge lines showing their true shapes without the cover of foliage, which were bony and beautiful and older looking than summer ever allowed them to appear. Claire worked on the house. She had called a contractor from Harlan Creek, a woman named June who had grown up 3 miles from the farm and knew the construction traditions of the county and had an opinion on everything and was right about most of it. They worked together on the porch first, because the porch was the face of the house and because fixing it felt like announcing something. Scout supervised. He had developed a routine in the weeks since the legal business concluded: a morning patrol of the property boundaries, a midday rest on the porch in whatever thin sunlight was available, an afternoon inspection of whatever work was being done, and an evening patrol before dark. It was the routine of a working dog who had retired into semi-retirement, which meant he had simply transferred his professional standards to a new context. Earl Sutton came to the farm twice a week. He would arrive in his old blue truck with something useful: a coil of fence wire, a jar of preserves his niece had made, information about the county's agricultural programs. He would sit on the porch and drink coffee and talk to Claire about Dorothy in the way old friends talked about the dead, not with grief exactly but with the particular texture of long memory, the way a person became more fully present in conversation after they were gone than they had sometimes been while living. "She used to sit right there," Earl said one afternoon, nodding toward the chair where Claire was sitting. "In the morning. With her coffee and that dog of hers. Just watching the hills." Claire looked at the hills. Scout came and put his head in Earl's lap without being invited, which was as close to a social gesture as he usually made, and Earl put his old hand on the dog's head with the ease of someone who had been around dogs his whole life and understood what they were offering. "I think she'd be glad," Earl said. "I think so too," Claire said. They watched the November hills together, and the farm held its quiet around them. The letter from the State Energy Commission arrived in December. It was brief and official and stated that following its investigation, the Commission had determined that Meridian Land Holdings had materially misrepresented the status of mineral rights in its licensing application, and that the application had been denied and the matter referred to the State Attorney General's office for further review. Claire read it at the kitchen table with her morning coffee and then set it aside. She had stopped being surprised that the law worked when you gave it the right material to work with. She had always believed that, even in the years when it had seemed most uncertain, even in places where the law was theoretical at best. The belief had not always been warranted, but she had held it anyway, which she supposed was what belief was. She put the letter in the folder with the other documents, the deed, and the survey and the notebook and Dorothy's letter, the whole paper history of a piece of land and the people who had loved it. Then she went outside. The December morning was cold, clear, the sky an improbable blue above the gray-brown hills. Frost silvered the grass in the south field. The creek she could hear but not yet see, hidden by the rise of the land, speaking in its winter register, lower and steadier than autumn. Scout was already out, running the east field line with the focused pleasure he brought to mornings, his dark shape moving through the frost-stiff grass, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. He had slowed some in the weeks since they had come to the farm. She noticed it in the mornings especially, the way his rear legs took a moment to find their confidence on cold ground. He was 11 years old, which was not old for some dogs and was very old for a dog who had lived the life he had lived. She watched him move through the field and felt what she always felt watching him, the complex thing that was pride and love and the specific grief of knowing that good things did not last forever but were not made less good by that fact. He saw her and came back at a steady trot, his ears forward, his eyes bright. She crouched down and let him press his face against hers, the cold of his nose against her cheek, his breath warm, his whole body communicating the uncomplicated satisfaction of a dog who had done his morning work and found his person waiting. "Good morning," she told him. His tail moved in the language she had spent 11 years learning to read. "Good morning. Everything is fine." I checked. Nora came in December, 10 days before Christmas. She drove down from Nashville, where she had flown in the night before, and arrived at the farm in the early afternoon with 2 bags and the expression of someone who had been told a story and was now seeing the actual place the story happened and finding it larger and more real than words had made it. She stood in the driveway and looked at the farmhouse for a long moment. The porch was repaired now, solid and level, the new boards bright against the weathered gray of the old ones. The front door had been rehung and painted a dark green that June had insisted on, and that was, Claire had to admit, exactly right. The oak trees stood over everything, leafless and enormous, their roots as old as the county. Scout came off the porch to greet Nora with the careful, measured welcome he gave to people he was meeting for the first time, a thorough olfactory investigation followed by a period of assessment. Nora stood still and let him work, which was the right thing to do and which told Claire something about her daughter that she already knew but was glad to be reminded of. "He's deciding if I'm trustworthy," Nora said. "He is," Claire said. "What's the verdict?" Scout leaned briefly against Nora's leg, the gesture he made with people he had decided were acceptable, and then went back to the porch. "Provisional approval," Claire said. Nora laughed and hugged her mother, and Claire held her daughter in the driveway of her grandmother's farm in the cold December afternoon, with the Tennessee hills all around them and the creek speaking in the south field and the house waiting with everything it held, 40 years of one woman's patience and stubbornness and love for a piece of land that she had protected until someone came to receive it. "It's beautiful," Nora said, looking at the hills over her mother's shoulder. "I know," Claire said. "It feels like somewhere people belong." "It does," Claire said. "I think that's what she built it to feel like." They went inside, and the farmhouse received them the way it was built to do, with the warmth of old walls and the smell of coffee and the quiet that was not empty but full of everything that had happened here and everything that was beginning. On the last evening of the year, Claire sat on the porch of the Harlan farm and watched the sun go down behind the western ridge. The cold was deep now, a clear Tennessee winter cold that had no ambiguity about it, that settled into your bones with the honest directness of something that was exactly what it was. She had a blanket around her shoulders and her hands wrapped around a mug of tea and Scout pressed against her side, warm and solid and present. The sky went from blue to green to the deep amber that lived for only a few minutes at the edge of dark, that particular color that had no name in any language she knew because it was too specific and too brief to have earned one, the color of a day ending well. She thought about Dorothy, who had sat on this porch for 40 years watching this same sky. She thought about Daniel, who had never sat here but who would have found exactly this chair and exactly this angle and would have said something she would always remember. She thought about the letter in the lot box, 8 lines in old handwriting, and the key that had opened everything, and the dog who had been paying attention when she almost wasn't. She looked at Scout. He was watching the western ridge with the same focused attention he brought to everything, his amber eyes steady on the last light, his breathing slow and even in the cold air. 11 years old, with a history in his body that showed in the way he moved on cold mornings and the gray that had spread across his muzzle and the particular stillness he sometimes settled into that was different from the stillness of his working years, quieter, more interior. He turned and looked at her. The look that needed no translation. The look she had been reading for 11 years, in Kandahar and Mosul and the long in-between places and now here, on this porch, on this farm, in this life she was building from what remained after everything else. "I'm here," the look said. "You're here. That's enough. That's everything." Claire put her hand on his neck and felt the warmth of him, the realness of him, this dog who had heard a key on an envelope and understood it mattered before she did, who had led her up a staircase to a chest and sat beside it and waited, who had found a notebook in a barn and given her everything her grandmother had left. The last light faded from the ridge. The first stars appeared. The farm settled into its winter dark around them, quiet and full in theirs. She had not planned to find this place. She had not planned to find herself here, at 58, starting something instead of finishing things. But plans, she had learned across 30 years of making them in places where they rarely survived contact with reality, were just the first draft of where life intended to take you. The second draft was always better. If you believe that some dogs find us before we find ourselves, type yes in the comments below. And if you've ever had a second chance you didn't X.